I had stood on hundreds, maybe thousands of stages with Elvis Presley, from small theaters in the early days to arenas packed to the brim. I had witnessed the lights, the screams, the sweat, and the relentless devotion to the king of rock and roll. But one night, September of 1975, in Memphis, I witnessed something that went far beyond music, something I have carried in my heart ever since. That evening, the air was electric. 20,000 fans held their breath, waiting for Elvis to appear. As the opening riff of CC Rider filled the Coliseum, I glanced sideways. Elvis drew a deep breath, adjusted the shimmering rhinestones on his white jumpsuit, and stepped onto the stage. The roar of the crowd was deafening, and we launched into the familiar opening number. I strummed my guitar in sync with the pounding rhythm, certain this would be another night, like so many before, bright, wild, unforgettable. But midway through the third song, Elvis slowed, his steps faltered, and his gaze locked not on the distant rows of screaming fans, but on one spot, very near the front. Having played with him for years, I knew the language of his eyes, sometimes fiery, sometimes distant, but this time was different. His eyes softened, heavy, almost pained. I followed his gaze and saw a small, frail boy with pale skin and golden hair. His face was thin, his body fragile, yet his eyes shimmered with something both bright and unbearably sad. Around me, I heard murmurs. One of the crew whispered, "That's Danny, the boy with the heart condition. He doesn't have much time left." At that moment, I knew the concert had changed. Elvis stopped mid-verse. I let my hands fall from the strings, my palms slick with sweat. 20,000 people fell silent. Sensing something sacred was about to happen, Elvis stepped closer to the edge of the stage, the spotlight bathing the boy's face in white light. Slowly, deliberately, he reached down. I saw the child's tiny, trembling hand slip into his. And then the entire Coliseum erupted, not in screams, but in sobs. In that moment, I was no longer just a musician. I was a witness to a miracle, and the miracle didn't come from the notes I played or the dazzling lights, but from one man, Elvis, who chose love over performance. When Elvis lifted Danny onto the stage, I saw the boy's tiny, trembling arms wrap around his neck. Thousands of camera flashes lit the arena, but somehow the world seemed to shrink down to just three souls: Elvis, Danny, and a sea of tears. I looked closely at Danny. He was so small, his frail body fighting for every breath. And yet, in Elvis's embrace, there was peace. It was as if all his pain and fear dissolved the moment he was held. A chill ran down my spine. I had never believed a concert stage could transform into something holy, a place where a singer didn't just perform, but offered salvation to a fragile little soul. Elvis gently set Danny on the piano. We, the band, waited in silence. No one dared to strike a note until Elvis gave the signal. Then, with a slight nod, "Edid." My hands trembled as I strummed the opening chords of Love Me Tender. We had played it hundreds of times, but that night, it carried a spirit unlike any other. Elvis no longer gazed at the distant rows or the roaring crowd. His eyes were locked solely on Danny, soft, tender, overflowing with love. He sang each line not to the thousands listening, but as if whispering to that one child alone. And then, the miracle happened. Danny's lips moved. At first, it was barely a whisper, like the sound of wind, but then he sang, fragile and wavering, his voice blending with Elvis's rich tone. Every note pierced through the air like an arrow straight into our hearts. I saw audience members rise to their feet, embracing one another, sobbing uncontrollably. Even some of the bandmates beside me quietly wiped their eyes. I don't remember how many notes I played after that. All I remember is the feeling we were no longer playing for entertainment, no longer performing for applause. We were part of a prayer, a farewell hymn for a child slipping away from this world. When the song ended, Elvis lowered his head until his forehead touched Danny's. I saw it clearly, a single tear sliding down Elvis's cheek, glistening in the spotlight. And I swear, that was the first and only time I ever saw the king of rock and roll cry on stage. That moment changed all of us forever. After that song ended, the entire arena sank into silence. It wasn't the silence of awkwardness, but the silence of thousands of hearts that had just witnessed a miracle. I sat there, my hands still resting on the guitar strings, my chest tight as if a long rain had just washed my soul clean. Elvis turned back toward us, his eyes saying, "Keep playing, but don't let the music tire Danny out." We understood. Every chord that followed was soft, tender, like a thin blanket covering the fragile boy who was fading before our eyes. I played each note as though I was rocking a little soul into peace. Looking down at the audience, I saw their faces. Strong men who had screamed wildly just minutes before were now bowing their heads, weeping quietly. Mothers held their children closer than ever, as if afraid that moment might steal them away. I saw children's eyes shining bright, not fully grasping the weight of loss, but understanding love. And that love spread across the room like fire, warming every soul it touched. What I'll never forget was the way Elvis looked at Danny. He wasn't performing. He wasn't hiding behind the mask of a superstar. He was simply a man, a father figure, opening his arms to shield a child he had never met, as if he were his own flesh and blood. Watching that, I finally understood why Elvis became a legend, not only for his voice, but because his heart never closed to another's pain. As Danny rested weakly against Elvis's shoulder, I felt time itself stop. The notes I played no longer sounded like music, but like a prayer whispered into the heavens. I begged silently, "Please, give this child a little more time. If not forever, then at least let him have this perfect moment." And I knew it wasn't just me. 18,000 people in that hall were all praying together. One crowd, one heart, all beating as one. The music went on. But by then, I felt as if we, the band, had become silent witnesses to something far beyond the idea of a concert. Normally, our duty on stage was to keep the rhythm, to build the foundation for Elvis to shine. But that night, none of us were thinking about playing perfectly or keeping the tempo tight. We were playing with our hearts, not for art's sake, but to cradle a fragile life that was slipping away. I glanced at the drummer. He had softened his hands, tapping gently as if mimicking a heartbeat, just enough to keep the flow alive. The horn player bowed his head, his breath carrying a melody more sorrowful than any sad tune I had ever heard. And my fingers trembled, not from fear of missing a note, but from knowing I was part of something sacred, a farewell moment soaked in tears. Elvis still held Danny close. He sang, but every now and then, he whispered something into the boy's ear. I couldn't hear the words, but I knew they weren't the words of a rock and roll star. They were the words of a father, trying to soothe a child whose fate had been cruelly shortened. The audience no longer roared. The silence was so heavy I could hear sobs, broken breaths, and stifled cries from those near the stage. Yet those tears didn't diminish the value of the performance. They made it immortal. That night, everyone realized they weren't just there for the music, they were there to witness a legend lower himself, open his arms, and turn a child's pain into something miraculous. In that moment, I understood music was never just sound. It was a bridge between lonely hearts, a comfort to those about to depart, and a wake-up call to those who remain to love one another more while we still have the chance. As the music slowly faded, I realized I was no longer just a musician. I had become part of an eternal story alongside Elvis, Danny, and the tens of thousands who witnessed it. That night, I saw clearly, music was not only for entertainment, but for salvation. Elvis sat beside Danny, as if to make the boy feel wrapped in the safest arms in the world. He set the microphone aside, singing without amplification, just his raw voice. A voice that had once shaken the world now sounded as tender as a mother's lullaby. And Danny, his eyes closed, lips curved into the faintest smile, seemed freed from all physical pain, as though the gentle waves of that song had carried it away. I looked at Elvis, and in his eyes, I saw profound sorrow. It was no longer the gaze of a stage idol. It was the gaze of a man who deeply understood the limits of life, and who was using his God-given gift, his voice, to fight against those limits. Perhaps he knew he could not keep Danny here any longer, but he wanted to give him one last memory, a moment of love, protection, and of being the center of the entire universe. In the silence, I witnessed something miraculous. 18,000 people seemed to breathe as one, cry as one. They were no longer just audience and performer. They had become a giant family, bound together by a miracle born of human compassion. That moment, I knew, would never come again. And deep inside, I whispered to myself, if one day I leave the stage for good, I won't want to take the applause with me. What I'll carry is the memory of moments like this, when music truly touched the soul. When Elvis stopped singing, the entire hall fell into silence, a sacred silence, as if everyone feared that even the slightest sound might shatter the fragile moment. Then, suddenly, a clap echoed from somewhere in the distance. Another followed. Within seconds, 18,000 people rose to their feet, applauding through their tears. But I knew that ovation wasn't for a performance. It was for love, for humanity itself. I still remember it vividly under the stage lights. I saw tear-streaked faces, swollen eyes. A burly man in the front row wept like a child. A young woman clung tightly to the person beside her, as if afraid of losing something precious. Never in my career had I seen a concert where people forgot they were just an audience. They had become part of Elvis and Danny's story, as if they themselves were living the pain and the miracle at once. Danny lay peacefully in Elvis's arms, as though he had drifted into gentle sleep. And I knew for that little boy, this was the final miracle of his life. Elvis said nothing more. He only bowed his head and kissed Danny's forehead, a kiss I am certain the entire hall would remember forever. I let go of my guitar, playing no further notes, because in that moment, music no longer needed instruments. Music had become Elvis's heart, the breath of the entire hall, and the final rhythm soothing Danny's fragile soul. And I thought to myself, from this day on, I will never play the same way again, for I have witnessed the true power of music, not to entertain, but to teach people how to love and to remember. That night, after the concert ended, I stayed backstage for a long time. My guitar rested on my lap, but my fingers trembled, unable to strike a single note. I just stared at my hands, hands that once believed they were only capable of creating melodies, but now felt as though they had witnessed a deeper truth. Music could become a bridge between life and death, between one soul and another. Elvis walked in quietly, his shoulders heavy. He said nothing, just sat down on a wooden chair, his head bowed low. The cheers were gone, the lights extinguished, leaving only a man who had given all his love to a child about to leave this world. I looked at him, and in that moment, Elvis was no longer the king of rock and roll. He was simply a father, a man with a scarred heart, carrying the world's pain so he could offer comfort to another. The image of Danny sleeping peacefully in Elvis's arms replayed endlessly in my mind. That little boy, with bright yet weary eyes, had taught me more than any lesson ever could. He showed me that what matters most is not how long we live, but how we live, being loved, being comforted, and being remembered. I knew the tens of thousands in the audience that night would carry home an unforgettable memory. But for me, standing on that stage, the memory became an indelible mark upon my soul. Every time I touched the strings afterward, I remembered that moment, and with each memory came a silent vow. Music is not meant to lift us above others, but to make us bend down and embrace the fragile souls in need of a gentle hand. Someday, people may forget who I was, my name may fade, but I will not grieve, because I know I once stood witness to a miracle. A moment when Elvis, music, and a boy named Danny made the world stop to weep, to love, and to believe in kindness. Some moments pass through our lives like fleeting wind, gone as quickly as they arrive. But there are also moments, brief as they may be, that remain eternal in the heart. That night, with Elvis and Danny, I witnessed a simple truth that pierced to the core. Music is not only meant to echo across a stage, but to reach into pain, to cradle broken hearts, and to restore faith in humanity. I have played thousands of shows, yet if I close my eyes, I can still hear the sobs of the entire hall, still see the glimmer in that boy's eyes as he looked up at Elvis, still feel the resonance of those final notes blending with Danny's fragile heartbeat. That night was no longer a performance. It was a lesson in love, a miracle of compassion that I was blessed to witness. And if anyone were to ask me, can music truly change the world, I would smile, close my eyes, and answer, I once saw music make the whole world stop to weep, to love, and to believe. What could ever be stronger than that?